my mom did everything. And I saw the stress that it caused her and saw the toll that it took on their marriage. And, I think she struggled a lot with it once my sister and I graduated, and moved out and were in college. And then even after college, she was just like, now what?
Right. Right.
There's nobody here. There's nothing to do. And, it was this kind of void. And then they, the two of them looked at each other like, well, who are you? What do we do now? And I think so much of their lives focused on my sister, and specifically my mom focused on my sister and I, that she didn't make time for her marriage. And I'm not saying this as like a negative thing about her. It's just
not. I think it's actually more common than people realize when there are children involved and children to care for. It's very easy to overlook the problems in a marriage because you're like, whatever, I'm just going to focus on the kids and I'll deal with that another day. And then that day comes. You've heard it before. You should stay married for the kids. Well, hopefully we're at a time in our lives where we're realizing exactly why you shouldn't do that. But in case you haven't gotten the memo, I have the perfect guest on today. I'm chatting with Kristy Dyer. She's from upstate New York, Buffalo. She is a co-parenting mom, and she learned firsthand as a child why you don't want to stay married for the sake of the kids. I'm really excited for you to hear this. You may resonate with it. You may not. But either way, it's a great window into what happens when you sacrifice your happiness for the needs of the kids and what they grow up feeling responsible with, and whether or not they're going to resent you. Yucky stuff. But here we go. Kristy, I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks for having me.
And you've been willing to share this part of your story with us, which I'm personally in this deep phase of trying to explore and understand my own childhood stuff as I try to make my co-parented experience as smooth as possible for my kids. And so I'm sure you're aligned there too.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think growing up in a blended family, I wasn't so much co-parented. My dad wasn't around as much, my bio dad, but my stepdad was raising me since I was 3, and my mom and my stepdad had my sister when I was 5. So I was never felt like an outsider, and just kind of always was, it was just, that was my family. But then as I got older and, realized things were a little different, the one thing that I did notice growing up, my mom never spoke ill of my bio dad, never said anything about him. And, it was a childhood of a lot of broken promises, oh, I'll come pick you up after school. And then no follow through. So,
which in itself is, that is really disappointing. And what's needed in that moment is not for your mom to be like, oh, screw him, he sucks. But hey, that really must have hurt. And that's where parents get it wrong. It's they feel like if they're acknowledging the poor behavior of the other parent, that they're speaking ill of them.
Right.
When in fact, all that's doing is validating for the child. That
right.
sucked.
Right. And she was really good at that. She wouldn't say oh, there he goes again. It was always just well, that sucks. What can we do instead? And usually it ended up, I got to go stay with my best friend. So it always kind of had a positive spin on it. And I give her a lot of credit for that, because it must have been hard, I hate seeing my kids disappointed. And it's it breaks my heart if they want to be able to do something and can't, or whatever, even if it's something that I say no to. I still feel bad about it. But it's something that my mom definitely got right, as far as, raising me with essentially 2 dads, right. One that was very consistently there and the other one that was very consistently not.
Yeah. And I mean, totally feel that. My stepdad, as you know, obviously ended up becoming my consistent, because my bio dad was not that. But unfortunately, for all of the things our parents may have done right, we're here to talk about the fact that some of the things were not so good and impacted us in ways that we wish they wouldn't have had to. For example, like staying together for the sake of the kids. Tell us about that experience for you.
Yeah, so it's interesting because my mom and bio dad did get divorced, but I was so young I don't have any memory of it. My mom and my stepdad have been amazing. They've been consistent, they've been supportive, they've been safe. Um, but the relationship that I saw growing up was one that I was like always a little confused by. It just um, seemed a little one sided. And now, as a co parent, and I have pseudo stepdaughters with my partner, and I get the dynamic is different. It's hard to know like where that boundary is, especially when you come into their life. So when they're so young, the kids are so young, do you do the discipline? Do you make the big decisions? Do you do these things? And I feel like it was a very hands-off approach for my stepdad, even though he was supportive of me and, everything that I was involved in. My mom did everything. And I saw the stress that it caused her and saw the toll that it took on their marriage. And um, I think she struggled a lot with it once my sister and I graduated, and moved out and were in college. And then even after college, she was just like, now what?
Right. Right.
there's nobody here. There's nothing to do. And, um, it was this kind of void. And then they, the two of them looked at each other like, well, who are you? What do we do now? And, um, I think so much of their lives focused on my sister, and specifically my mom focused on my sister and I, that she didn't make time for her marriage. And I'm not saying this as like a negative thing about her. It's
It's
just,
not, I think it's actually more common than people realize when there are children involved and children to care for. It's very easy to say, to overlook the problems in a marriage because you're like, whatever, I'm just going to focus on the kids and I'll deal with that another day. And then that day comes.
yeah. Yeah. And I think, they are still together. And it's, they're going on almost 40 years now that they've been married. But I saw a lot of the struggles, and I do remember my mom taking a step back and like essentially moving out for a little while. And
While you were still a child or after?
no, I had moved out, and I have to apologize because I don't know if this is like a coping mechanism that I developed at a young age. I block things out, especially negative things. And I just don't remember them, and I don't remember where they fit in the timeline. But it was after I had moved out, and my ex-husband actually just reminded me of this, that my mom had moved out of the house for a while. And I do think I was married at the time, but I don't think I had had my daughter yet. So it was probably within like the 4 or 5 years from when I had first gotten married to when I had my first kid.
Mm-hmm.
And she was really struggling with, my sister was still in college at the time, but she wasn't living at home. She was taking care of her father. And that was it was a big job. He was quadriplegic and needed round the clock care. So she was doing a lot of that while working full time. And she just, I think, had hit a breaking point. And I do wonder now if she kind of looks back on that and wishes that she had maybe followed through with it.
Mm.
Because she does say, she's, it's funny because like she says she's proud of me for my divorce. And I'm like, well, like, I guess, like, I don't know if I would
Well, it's
consider
also
it
a
like a,
reflection to her of what she probably knows she could have done and should have done, but didn't want to have to do twice because you guys had already, or you had already been through it.
right. And I think, and yeah, at that point they had already been together over 20 years. So it's like, what, everything is so enmeshed. And how do you untangle everything at that point, I think?
1,000%. And so, the question then is like, yes, we stayed together for the kids. But what we didn't think about, and this is where people approach me all the time to tell me like, oh, I'm not divorced, but my parents are, and they waited until I was out of the house. And I wish they would have done it sooner because that messed me up so much that they stayed together for my sake. Right.
Right.
And so then the question becomes, we're so focused on thinking children need this semblance of nuclear family. Why aren't we looking at what happens within that? And if it's going to affect them more than if we split up?
Right.
So
And
what were some of the effects that you feel like you now are burdened with that you have to unravel that maybe led to your own divorce?
well, I think yeah, I kind of was going to say exactly that. Like, I think, especially once we had kids, I just took on everything. Because that was what I had seen. That was the model that I had seen. Um, and to my ex's credit or whatever, I guess, like that's kind of what he saw too. He didn't really know any different. So his mom took care of him and his four siblings, and his dad worked on their dairy farm. And that was, kind of like, this side of the road is yours, this side of the road is mine. And that was what my mom did too. So I just kind of fell into that role almost like unconsciously, like didn't really have that discussion. I mean, we did talk about like, my ex had said like, I'm not gonna miss my kids' things. Like his dad wasn't able to come watch a lot of his events and things because he was working. It's a 24/7 job. And he said that, I'm not going to miss my kids' things. I'm going to make sure I'm there. And he was for the most part, but it was all of the little thing, the doctor's appointments, the birthday parties, the Christmas gifts, the just everything day to day, little and big things too, like just what kind of car we were going to buy or where we were going to go on vacation. It was like all of these things, all of these decisions just felt like they kept piling on me. And I didn't really recognize it until it was too late. And, things just, they kind of get away from you before you realize it's happening.
Mhm.
So then turning it around was like, it's going too fast at that point. It's like a runaway train. You can't stop it.
Right. If you're like me, you could definitely use some extra cash right now. So if you're sitting on old engagement jewelry that's been collecting dust in a drawer that you're like, why do I even still have this? I've got news for you. The experts at Worthy can help you turn that into cash. The cash you could probably use right now on your single parenting journey. It's risk-free, it's fast, literally no more than 2 weeks until you are joining one of the 80,000 people who have already had their jewelry turned into cash. Thousands of people have left verified 5-star reviews. This is a legit process that will make you feel so much lighter and your pockets a lot fuller. Trust me, these guys are the real deal. So all you need to do is visit worthy.com/moms, and I'm going to give you an extra $100 on me if your jewelry sells for over $1,500. That's worthy.com/moms, and I've got you covered. So what were some of the things now that you're like, hopefully unraveled more from all of it? What were some of the things that you think that your parents staying together conditioned you to do or left you with? Like, I know there was this idea of perfectionism from your mom. How did that affect you as an adult?
I mean, I think a lot of it when I was younger was just seeing the tension between my parents. I kind of wanted to be perfect and be a people pleaser to ease that tension, or to be like, hey, look over here, this is a good thing that I did, and make them both proud of me so it would distract from whatever they were arguing about.
All that, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then that just carried into my first marriage. It was like the same thing. Like, I would make a meal and I'd be like, see, I did this great thing, or I got the kids were bathed and fed and in bed and I did it all by myself. Can't you recognize, like, and it was to try to keep the peace and keep things, even. And
Yes. You took on that role of like, I can make things right here, just focus on what I can do well. And that conditions you to believe that you always have to be doing things right, which is such an unfair position to take as a child.
yeah. And I don't think it was ever like expressly said, my parents never said like, we expect you to be, you know, getting all A's, or we expect you to get a scholarship to college, or whatever, never like we expect it, but it was always like this kind of undertone of like, well, that's what you should be doing.
Mhm.
Like it wasn't like an actual like, you'll get in trouble if you don't, but it was just like, come home with, the highest GPA in my class. And it was just like, okay, good.
I had a client recently who was telling me a story about how when her daughter comes home with a good grade, like she celebrates it, like, like amazing. I'm so proud of your effort. How proud of
Yeah.
yourself do you feel? And she told her daughter just to keep things like, positive,
Yeah.
FaceTime dad and tell him about your good grade. And his
Yeah.
response was, okay, well, you should be doing that. Like,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. And I see that too a little bit with my kids. Like I have a 15-year-old, so she's in 10th grade, a 12-year-old in 6th grade, and an 8-year-old in 3rd grade. And so girl, boy, girl. And my son is he's a 12-year-old boy. He's a little squirrely, and he likes to be the class clown and, say things and do things just to get people to, you know, have a good time. And his teacher will just put that in the comments. It's never anything that warrants a phone call home, but puts it in the comments. And that's the thing that gets focused on from
yeah,
my ex. And I'm just like, hey, look, I said to him one time, I said, you got all these like really good grades and you were being kind of silly. Like imagine, how great you could do if you were, even more focused. I said, I'm glad that you did so well. I'm glad that you're like, that proves how smart you actually are.
right.
I said, but there's a time and a place. So let's make sure we're doing things in, recess and lunchtime and gym class, even whatever. But just you're old enough to understand that this is, there's an appropriate time and place. And because I started to say, but, and he goes, but, and I'm like, okay, you got great grades and you're
And
silly. Yeah.
right, the
Yeah.
duality, right? And that's what's
Yeah.
taken away from us as children who grow up in these homes where they either feel parentified and obligated to fix the relationship for their parents because their parents are too stubborn to walk away from each other and give the children a reprieve, right?
Right.
But we don't know what we don't know, and I think we are the first generation who is finally wrapped our heads around the fact that like you can't stay together for the kids if it's
Yeah.
going to put more stress on the kids.
Right. And I've had conversations with even some of my friends that are going through some either divorce or rough patches or whatever. And I'm like, your kids deserve a happy mom, not a married mom. That's not, I know you say it all the time, and maybe it's like, I just like am
I wish
regurgitating
I
it.
trademarked that quote
Yeah,
because
you really
honestly,
should.
it is
Because,
so true.
but it's funny the amount of women that haven't heard it. And I've even said it to my ex
And
too,
how many
like, and
people it triggers too. That comment triggers a lot of people.
well, and it's funny because my ex and I stayed together for a long time and tried to make it work. And we finally did look at each other and say, like, we don't want to end up like our parents.
Oh,
We don't
you're
want to.
breaking the cycle.
Yes. I mean, literally, we said it. And like, we had a very calm, rational conversation about it. But it was years of, trying couples therapy and individual therapy and just constant communication. And we were going around the same merry-go-round. And we finally said that. And we've said it over and over to each other. Like, the situation wasn't good for either one of us, but it really wasn't good for our kids. They were so young, but they could feel the tension. Like they just pick up on that vibe
Yeah.
in the home, and it's not fair to them. They don't deserve to live that life that we created. So, I think that was, he has 4 siblings that have all been married and divorced, and they're all remarried. But it was like this big shameful thing at first in the family, and then it's just like, but is it worth it to stay in a position where you're so miserable you're making your kids miserable? Like that, you can't, or you're making your kids overcompensate to try to make sure that you're at least happy with them,
Oh my God.
because when you're little you think, is it my fault? Like, I don't know, did I do this? So, it's tough. Like I said, my parents were so supportive, and they did, my sister and I have, you know, not to like pat myself on the back.
Pat yourself on the back,
We turned
girlfriend.
out pretty good, like we both have doctorates, and we've been, like successful in our careers, and we have healthy, beautiful children and good relationships with our parents still, and good relationships with each other. And,
Let me
so
point out that duality. You got divorced and have healthy
yeah,
relationships with your kids
yeah,
and.
yeah,
That's why, people need to recognize that divorce doesn't just shut down all the good
right,
that can come in life.
right. And I think, I don't know if it's maybe a generational thing too. They look at it more as like a moral failing.
Oh, yeah.
I think
Totally
that it's,
generational.
yeah. And whereas I think I said to somebody the other day, I'm like, I feel like we should all have, be like a starter home. We should have a starter marriage. I mean, like, just be married for a couple years, 1 to 5.
It should be after college,
Yes.
you spend a year, like people take a gap year for
Yeah.
college, a
Yeah.
gap year and spend it married to
Yes.
someone.
Yeah. Like fully married, do the whole thing.
Let's start that.
Yeah. I really do. I mean, I like, I think that because when you do that, you really kind of narrow in on what you want, but more specifically what you don't want.
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing that I gained from my parents staying together was I don't want that. I don't want to be in a position in my 50s or 60s where I can't take a vacation that I want to take because we have to do what he wants because we've always done what he wants, or vice versa. I just don't think you really, especially when, I mean, I got married so young the first time, like when you do get married in your early or mid or even late 20s, you're not like a fully formed adult yet.
You're
And
not
you
even
don't know
allowed
what.
to rent a car on your own until you're 25. You can get married at 18.
Yeah.
Like, make that make sense.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like
Seriously.
from everything you're telling me, you have maybe even unintentionally broken these cycles because I think, unfortunately, it takes having to go through the shit and the hard stuff to know that there's even a cycle that needs to be broken. But that's why we become powerful. We're able to recognize that we can do better for our kids than was
Right. And
done for us.
yeah. And I even said it to my daughter the other day. Like, I think, again, I think the generational thing is like the, the boomers, you don't talk about emotions. You don't, especially if it's negative, it is off limits.
Sweep that under the rug.
Yeah, exactly. And they might go to their own therapy, but they're not going to come back and use those strategies. They're just going to deal with it on their own. And it's like, well, okay, that's good. But and I said to my daughter, like, I want to have a better relationship with you than I've had with my mother. I love my mom, but we can't talk about anything serious. We can't talk about anything that's uncomfortable. She just shuts down. And that's the way she was raised. And that's not her fault either. But
So what are
my,
some ways that you encourage your daughter to open up to you
I
so that
mean,
you're not replicating what your mom.
I said to her, I said, and she's 15, so she don't want to talk about anything with me because I don't know anything, of course. But
That'll last like another year or two from my personal experience, and they come
yeah,
around again.
yeah, and that's what I've heard. And she goes, well, I don't have anything I want to talk to you about. I said, I'm not saying today. I'm not saying next month, next year. I said, I am saying for the rest of your life, this door is open. I don't care if you think I'm not going to like it. I don't care if you think that it's uncomfortable or mean or whatever. I need you to know that you can come to me and talk to me about anything. And I'm going to listen. And if you need me to help you, I'll help you. If you need me to just be a sounding board, then that's what I'll do. But I want that door always open for the rest of your life. You come to me with anything, anytime. And she didn't say anything after that, but it was just like, I, I mean,
That's and reinforcing it. And also, I always say we can tell our kids stuff, but if our actions aren't matching our words, then what good is it? Constantly reminding them when they do tell us something like, wow, that was really brave of you to tell me that. Because I
right,
know some
right,
kids might be scared to tell parents
right.
those things. I'm
Yeah,
so proud that you told me. And
yeah.
remembering to like hold the judgment.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, unfortunately, she's the oldest daughter, just like I was. And I do tell her that all the time. I said, You got the short end of the stick. I said, You're the oldest. So you paved the way. I said, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm doing it for the first time with you. I said, by the time I get to your little sister, I'll have at least a better idea of
Right.
what I'm supposed to be
Starter
doing.
marriage, starter kid.
Right, exactly. I said, but I understand in your position because I was in that position. I was the older sister. I was the oldest cousin. I mean, and I grew up very close with my whole family. So I was the first one to go through all of these things. I said, I understand the position that you're in. So if I, you know, overreact to something unnecessarily, I'm going to come and apologize. And I can't tell you how many times I've apologized to her because I'm just like, I handled that like a jerk. Like, I did not.
That's so
Like,
important, that repair.
yeah, and I think she's probably tired of hearing me say, "I'm sorry, I messed up again." But I'm like, I'm going to recognize, I'm going to acknowledge the fact that like my bad, like I made a
But
mistake.
that's all of parenting, right? When they're young, is like they're not going to appreciate it now.
Yeah.
They won't have to recover from it later. And
And that's, I guess that's kind of my ultimate goal with all three of them is I want them to enjoy their childhood. I want them to have, you know, everything as normal as possible, as if nothing had happened, as if we,
that's
me and
number
their
one
co.
on the Children's Bill of Rights.
Yeah. And then I want to set them up to be, you know, mentally healthy, functioning, productive members of society. And I don't want them to have to need therapy. If they want to go, great. Like, just like you should, go to the gym or take a walk or whatever. Like, if you want to do that for your own mental fitness, then great. But I don't want to be the cause of it. I just, and that's kind of, I think part of the reason that their dad and I really did sit down and just say, we can't keep doing this to each other, but ultimately to them. Like, they're the most important three people within this family unit. We need to do what's best for them. And staying married wasn't it.
Well, I mean, absolutely. And I'm so honored that you shared this story with us. And before we go, I'm wondering if there was, let's say, a good friend of yours who walked up to you one day and said, Kristy, do you think I should stay married for the kids? Why or why not? What would you say?
I did actually just have a friend ask me about this, and she has a really young kid. And I said, well, you have to look at the whole situation. I mean, for women, I think we have to try everything. We have to know that we've exhausted all possibilities before we, finally make that decision. But when we do make that decision, we've kind of already grieved the marriage. So if it's a thought in your mind, you need to discuss it with your partner. You need to bring it to their attention. And if they're not willing to have an open and honest conversation about it, then that's probably your answer. And then that's when I said, your son deserves a happy mom, not a married mom.
Boom. That's it. To everybody listening, it's not an easy decision to make. The advice is perfect. You want to lay your head down on your pillow at night knowing you've tried anything and everything to make it work and then tried one more time. But ultimately, the question becomes, would I want my child or children to be in this kind of relationship one day? And that will give you all the answers you need. For all of you listening, thank you so much for being here. If you are ready to take the next step, you can reach out to info@momsmovingon.com to ask us about how you and I can work together so I can hold your hand through that part. Or you can check out our courses page where I have pre-recorded information to help you get through the first steps of leaving said marriage and so much more. Kristy, you're a gem. We so appreciate your time with us. And for everyone listening, thanks for being here on the Moving On Method.
Thanks for having me.